Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jewel Ratzlaff and I am with the Poughkeepsie Public Library District. This is part of a series that was inspired by Doug Tallamy's book, Nature's Best Hope. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I would definitely encourage you to pick up a copy at your local library. We are recording the session tonight, and therefore, I will be sending you a link tomorrow. So if you wanted to share it with a friend or family member, that's fine. But just so everybody knows, we are recording tonight's session. So be forewarned. Tonight, our focus is on our own landscaping choices. And we have with us Kathy Lane, Master Gardener and Hyde Park Visual Environment Committee Chair, and Jen Rubo, the Director of the Environmental Preserve at Vassar Barnes. We do not have a meeting next week. We'll be meeting in 2 weeks on March 24, and our focus that night will be on invasive plant species. We will have guest Brent Boscarino of the New York and New Jersey Trail Conference with us. He is a citizen science educator, and he's gonna teach us how to identify and dig up invasive species. I wanted to also remind you that before we meet again next time, there is a Town of Poughkeepsie meeting that you might be interested in on the 23rd of March, introducing the pollinator pathway that is coming to the town of Poughkeepsie. So that information is by Zoom, and you can get that information on the town website. And of course, I'll be sending out our resource sheet that we keep growing and growing. It's up to 3 pages now. Thank you for all of your great suggestions. And we'll be adding more to the resource sheet tonight from Kathy and Jen. And I also wanted to just remind you that on that resource sheet will be the link to the May 6th Doug Tallamy presentation. It's a webinar that he's doing with the Garden Conservancy. So if you want to hear him speak, he is always challenging and inspiring, and I would definitely encourage you to join that. So it looks like we have quite a large crowd, and we are going to just jump right in. We're going to start with Kathy Lane. She is a master gardener, and she's got some really great practical suggestions that she's bringing to us tonight. We're going to do both presentations, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. All right, so I'll just turn it over to Kathy.
Okay, thank you very much, Jewel. Can you hear me? Am I speaking loud enough? Okay, I'm going to share the screen. I'm basically going to talk about using my own experience in our garden, our yard, how we're trying to evolve by reducing lawn and adding natives and really planting for the pollinators, which I originally, when we first moved in, was not really thinking of. I was getting pretty plants and putting them in. So I think like with everyone else, it's a kind of an evolving thing. It's something that I don't want people to get discouraged. Anything you can do to help the pollinators will make a difference. So I'm going to start with just describing, we have about 1.25 acre lot, and it has a buffer of like trees and shrubs, lots of invasives in there between the homes. So there's a lot of privacy, fortunately for me, because, you know, pollinator gardens is a different aesthetic. And sometimes, you know, I don't deadhead or leave things up, you know, and I'll get into that later. But there was nothing, there were no gardens at all. And it was just mostly 1 acre of all lawn. So over the years, I have decreased the lawn, my husband and I both, and we have incorporated a lot of natives. I want to present this in a way that will maybe, you know, when I read Doug Tallamy, I always feel like I'm a failure because he's so good. So I'm trying to bring this to a level that anybody can do. One of the things from his book that's really important to remember is depending on your size of your yard or whatever, try to incorporate the keystone plants. They've really learned that there's certain trees and shrubs and perennials that are much more, will give you much more supportive pollinators. He talks about the keystone plants, and I know you have a thing on the trees, which the oak tree is incredibly supportive of pollinators, and they even give the number of values. I think it's 480. I can't, I'm going off the top of my head. So the oaks, the willows, the cherries, the plums. Since you already have that chart of the trees, I'm going to touch on some perennials that are among the keystone plants, and also some ephemerals, which are really important, and I'll explain why they are as well to the pollinators. So starting off with this, we all know that for the monarchs, which are specialists, we should incorporate milkweed into our yards. But one of the things that people are trying to stress now with pollinator gardens is it's equally important to include your late summer, fall blooming plants. And some of the ones that really are, I think, if you can do anything, do these, would include the asters, which I have here with a bumblebee getting ready to land on an aster. If you look at them in the fall, you can just stand there. There's so much activity going on with them. So that would be a plant that, if you, depending on the size of your yard, if you can put anything in, put the asters in. It's for their, okay. Okay, now I'm trying to move it along and it's not moving. It's okay, let's go back. I'll keep talking while I'm trying to move this along. Oh, there we go. The next plant, which is really important, and he talks about in his book, is goldenrod. This supports about 138 pollinators. The asters only support 12, but it's a really important late season plant. And here you see the bees on them as well. It's, so that would, now the goldenrod does spread. I happen to love it. It's not the allergy causing plant that people think it is. It relies on pollinators. The pollen is too heavy to really fly around that much. So I've forgotten what the other one is, which has very light pollen, but happens to bloom at the same time. But if you can include goldenrod, and they have different varieties, some are smaller, so that you could possibly put in a smaller garden. I'm going to touch on spring ephemerals and talk about a little bit bloodroot. The reason spring ephemerals are important is not that they support a huge array of pollinators, but they're important for especially the bumblebees and flies as well. But the bumblebees, in the winter, all the bumblebees die except for the queen, and the queen overwinters. Bumblebees are extremely efficient pollinators, in part because they can tolerate some lower temperatures. So you'll see them often in the evening, still out there when other pollinators are no longer out there, and earlier in the morning. So the queen overwinters, and when the queen emerges from her nest, she needs to find food. So these early ephemeral natives are very important to them. Bloodroot blooms, it's one of the earliest bloomers in early April. And while it doesn't have nectar, it's rich in pollen. The bumblebee, the queen bee, will go back to her nest, lay her eggs, and she cares for that first set of eggs until they hatch. And then she stays in the nest, and the rest of the bumblebees take over doing the work. But so that's why things such as the bloodroot, the trout lilies, some of these early ephemerals, technically bloodroot's not a true ephemeral because the leaves do last into midsummer. But the interesting thing about the bloodroot, as well as with some of the other early ephemerals, is the ants are the ones that spread the seeds. The bloodroot has a covering over the seed that is very attractive to ants. And I hope I pronounced this. It's elaiosome, and they carry the seeds off to their nest, to the larva. The larvae eat off the elaiosome, the covering, and then the ants put it effectively kind of in their waste disposal, which is very rich. It's like putting it into a compost pile, and the seeds germinate. So many years ago, probably 20 years ago, I purchased the bloodroot. I put it as a woodland plant. I planted it there. This bloodroot is all over in the sunny areas of the yard. It's everywhere, and it's gorgeous. And it's also an important plant for the bumblebee. Some other early ones that are good to have are, if you have moist areas, or marsh marigolds. So, even some of the ones that may not support a wide range of pollinators can be very important. And in this case, these are. So I would really encourage you to incorporate some spring ephemerals. And, it's just something to do, maybe, every year. So just showing kind of the front of our house. This is a little bit older picture. So I've actually brought it out more. But in terms of trying to reduce your lawn, of course, there were no gardens here. So gradually we put in the garden beds. And every year I just go around the edges, and I probably take maybe a foot more off the edge, and when I do the edging, to bring it out. So it's been a gradual, every year, expanding the width of the beds, the sides of the beds, connecting beds. And by not doing it all at once, it's just kind of a gradual way of doing things. And as the plants expand, and in this garden, there's phlox, there's echinacea. Back here are the heliopsis, the perennial sunflower, and that is also an important keystone plant that supports about 70 pollinators. But if you look at it, the aesthetic is different. It's not a extremely tidy grouping of plants. And there's also Rudbeckia that's just starting to come up, and what comes up in here. I don't deadhead because the birds eat the seeds. One of the tips that Tallamy gives, which I really want to try, because in the winter, I leave everything up in the back for the pollinators to get this to feed off of and take shelter in. The front, because we're in a neighborhood, and the reality is, you have to have some tidiness. I wait as long as I can, and then I do cut them down and I lay them in a brush pile. And again, you have a lot of solitary bees that are overwintering in these stems. One of the suggestions he made was to cut especially the hollow stems down, like the Joe Pye weed, put them in a bundle, and then put them in the back of your yard. So I'm going to try that, actually. I've been kind of laying them on top of a pile and not sure quite how they're doing, but he suggested something like that, which I think is a nice compromise. So this is the other, these are all borders that I keep bringing out and out. Actually, this was taken a few years ago. This is no longer lawn. This has been expanded. But one of the things he also stresses that's important is, if you have a tree like this, it's a great benefit, but lawn around. So what happens is that when the leaves fall, they need to remain where they are, because there were a lot of pollinators and larvae in those leaves. If you enclose these trees in gardens, or like even a single tree like this, do a garden around it, you can leave the leaf material when it falls where things are overwintering. And it's also a good way to eliminate reduce the size of your lawn and have your natives. There's some woodland phlox, native phlox in here. You can't really see what's in there, but it's the idea of enclosing those trees. And now it's kind of down to the driveway. So it's a gradual thing. Here's just a view of the heliopsis. This is an example. This is an example. I don't know if my pointer will show. The bright red there is Lychnis, which we put in years ago for the color. It's a bit of a, spreads by seeds. It's short-lived. That would be something I would not put in today, but it seeded itself there. But the Heliopsis is another view of the Heliopsis in the front. That is a really important pollinator plant as well. Helianthus, rather, not Heliopsis. This is the bottle brush buckeye. It's a shrub. And I have this picture here just to, I've got to stop. It's 10 minutes. Just to let you know that when you purchase native plants, just really quickly, it's a wonderful pollinator plant. It is not native to New York State, though. And I would advise you to research it a little bit just to make sure. A lot of nurseries sell these as native plants, but just to make sure it's not going to be invasive in New York State. The cup plant that is also a native and was sold here is now on the prohibited list. But there's a lot of like, this is a wonderful, wonderful shrub, and it is not invasive. But I need to end that with with your pollinator garden. That's our owl that likes to watch us work in the garden, who are a barred owl. So I will move out now because I've used up my time. And
do you have more pictures, Kathy?
No, that was it. That was it.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. So thank you so much. I think you've given us real practical ways to approach this that makes it, pretty doable. So let's go to Jen. And I do see that some folks are putting questions in the chat box. We will address those after we've heard both our presentations. So go ahead, Jen, you can share your screen.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Such a nice day today, and it's making me excited, and this presentation is making me more excited about spring. So anyway, okay, let's see. All right, I wanted to start my presentation with just a quick acknowledgement of the native peoples that lived here in Poughkeepsie, and were actually the first stewards and educators of the land that we live on. At Vassar, the campus exists on lands that were once home to the Delaware Nation, the Delaware Lenape tribe, and the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohegans. And then, although many sources reference the Wappingers as the indigenous peoples of our campus, they are a confederacy of native peoples who organized at one time in response to Euro-American incursions into the area. And they actually no longer exist as an organized group. I found that very interesting, that little bit about the Wappinger Indians, because growing up in the area, I always thought, they were the tribe that lived here, but actually they were just kind of a group that organized for a short period of time. The Stockbridge-Munsees and the Lenape still exist and have been pushed out of the area, out of the Hudson Valley, and now live in Wisconsin. Let's see. Okay, so I thought I'd just start by introducing my yard. This is just taken off of Parcel Access. So here's my little 1 acre plot of land. I live in Unionvale. And you can see it's just like your typical suburban neighborhood. We have a little above ground pool. We've put in a little garden here. We have a little chicken coop you can't see right here with three hens that sometimes lay eggs and sometimes don't. And we've taken this and tried to implement some of what Doug has talked about in his book. So I'm going to show you a few pictures. We put in a little mini meadow in this little section here. I'm hoping you can see my pointer. We put in a pollinator garden right under our back porch, which, this is west facing. So we get the setting sun, the afternoon sun kind of beats down on our backyard. And then in the front, we've added some more woodland species and a little garden right here of just pollinator plants. So I'm going to show you just a few pictures just as an introduction. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Vassar. So there it is, our little mini meadow. We've actually expanded it this year and now it circles around here. We do mow a path behind it, which we find helps kind of separate it from this tree line where there's quite a bit of invasives. So we have stilt grass that's coming in. We have a bunch of bittersweet that we cut every year along this tree line. And I think that mowing helps a little bit in the back. It makes it so it's not as, there's not as much of a connection. There's a nice close-up in the summer. We have 2 bird boxes back here that I think one year we got bluebirds, but now mostly we just have swallows, which are also really fun to watch. And there's the obligatory butterfly photos taken by my son. I think this is a silver-sided skipper and then a monarch on Monarda and butterfly weed. And that's my daughter standing next to some giant wild bergamot or Monarda fistulosa that is literally taller than she was. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. We've since learned that if you trim the Monarda between Mother's Day and Father's Day, it doesn't get as tall and won't flop over, which is what was happening. And then this picture on the right is also her with some giant Joe Pye weed. And this is the little garden that's under our back deck. And then in the front of our house, we have some of those spring ephemerals that Kathy was talking about. We have one lone trillium that we've been like nursing, but it's every year it comes up and gives us this one beautiful flower. And then we have some wild geranium, which is lovely and seems to really like dry, shady. I mean, we see it along the side of the road all the time. So that's a nice one. Okay, so that's my little introduction to my yard. I thought since we're talking about backyard stuff, I should share mine. So I am the director of the environmental cooperative at the Vassar Barns. This is an initiative through Vassar that is focused on outreach and education. And just to kind of orient us, I'm sure everybody is somewhat familiar with where Vassar is. So this is Vassar's main campus. The Ecological Preserve is this whole southern piece of Vassar College. Kind of zooming out a little bit, you'll see the farm and the preserve circled here, and it does lie, it is really one of the largest open spaces within the city and town of Poughkeepsie. So we kind of straddle the border of the city and town of Poughkeepsie. And this is a map that was made by Hudsonia. It's a habitat assessment map that identifies all the different habitats in the city and the town of Poughkeepsie. That's available, I believe, through the town of Poughkeepsie and the city of Poughkeepsie. They each have their own. So a lot of people refer to the Ecological Preserve as the farm. It used to be a farm, and Vassar used to use it to grow crops for their students, and also they had dairy cows. It was a working farm, but now it's kind of, the name is kind of a remnant. It's really made up of mostly an ecological preserve. Some people call it the preserve, the Vassar Farm and Ecological Preserve, the Vassar Ecological Preserve. We're working on this whole naming thing actually right now. But it does contain several different entities. It has the Collins Field Station, the Environmental Cooperative, the Poughkeepsie Farm Project, which many people are aware of, and they're actually their own nonprofit that lease land from Vassar College. We have community gardens there. Vassar's rugby team has their fields there. The cross-country team has cross-country tracks there, I guess it's called the trails. And then the Student Conservation Association has their regional offices in the Environmental Cooperative Barn. And the mission of the Ecological Preserve is really focused on preserving and managing the land for ecological diversity and promoting field-based education and research. There's a lot of stuff going on the preserve. There's land management, invasive species removal, recreation, public outreach. There's trails that people can walk. Unfortunately, right now it's closed to the public due to COVID, but hopefully that will be changing soon. And then of course, student and faculty research is happening there. There's a lot of hidden benefits besides all these other things. You know, there's a lot of ecosystem functions, which Doug Tallamy talks about in his book. There's a whole little section on it, and the preserve offers these functions to the greater Poughkeepsie community. It sequesters carbon, it cleanses the water. The Casperkill runs right through the preserve, and it's an important area for recharging that water source as far as taking out pollutants. And it provides a lot of habitat for a really diverse amount of species, mammals. There's bobcat, otters, beaver, all sorts of things. We have a lot of successional old fields, which support over 250 wildflower species. It's a refuge for a number of rare plants and other animals. And of course, it's an important source for public health, mental health, and access to green space for the surrounding community and for Vassar students and staff as well. But there are a lot of threats to it right now that you can see here, and I'm sure a lot of these are also threats that you have in your backyard. I know I do. We have a lot of deer, we have a lot of invasive species, declining pollinators, human impacts, habitat degradation, and climate change are all things that are impacting the preserve and all of our natural areas in the Hudson Valley. And the preserve is actually working really hard right now to create and implement a conservation action plan where they've set up goals and are working towards those. So really quickly, the environmental cooperative, which is what I manage and direct, is really the outreach part of the ecological preserve. So our mission is to inspire engagement, support current efforts, and develop new opportunities for people to engage with conservation locally. And so my office is in this renovated cow barn. This used to be a dairy barn on the preserve. And it's right when you come in. So as you're coming in, so this is Hooker Avenue. As you come down the farm road here, the barn is located right here. And it's kind of noted for the 3 large silos that are in the center of this courtyard. And right across from it, you can see these fields here are that's the Poughkeepsie Farm Project. So we share a parking area with the Poughkeepsie Farm Project. And we've been doing a lot over the past, I mean, we've started, the environmental cooperative was started in 2016. So it's been about 5 years. We've been trying to engage Vassar students in local conservation efforts. We're providing opportunities for students, faculty, and staff to interact with the greater community, so getting off of campus and doing work. We also have space in the barn for rental that any community group can use, although not right now during COVID. But we're using that as a place for groups to come together. And then we offer several different educational programs that are on the preserve and that we also do off-site as well. On campus, we've been working to help promote this idea of pollinator habitat. And we've had students a couple years ago collected seeds on campus, grew them in our greenhouse, and then created a pollinator garden at this site that was located right near Sunset Lake. And here's how it looked a year later. We did a really heavy planting of just a few species that we were able to collect seeds and germinate ourselves with the hopes that it would keep down the weeds. But we have butterfly weed, we have Monarda fistulosa, we have swamp milkweed, goldenrod, and asters that got munched. The asters actually got really munched by the deer. I believe there was there's also like golden Alexander, which is a native that's actually really pretty and an early blooming perennial. We've also had a number of tree plantings on campus over the past 3 or 4 years. We had one near Sunset Lake where Vassar students helped plant about 70 trees. We had another one near Kenyon Hall, if anyone's familiar with where Wimpheimer Nursery School is, kind of that other end of campus, the northern end of campus, right next to the Casperkill. We planted 250 trees there in 2019. And then just this past year, we planted 750 trees at a restoration site right in the center of the Ecological Preserve. So all those tubes each have a little baby tree in them. And this was all supported by the Hudson River Estuary Program's Trees for Tribs program. So those trees came, we had to write a proposal, they gave us the trees, and then we had students dig holes and plant them. So free labor was nice. It was a lot. And then the other thing that we've been really involved in the past 4 years or so is the College Hill Park Coalition. And College Hill Park has a wonderful pollinator garden designed by Barbara Restaino and maintained by a group of volunteers. And I try to get Vassar students out there, and we've partnered with the SCA to help maintain it in the past few years. But it's really gorgeous. If you're ever in Poughkeepsie and you take a ride up to College Hill Park, which is also just a lovely park in general. It's the highest point in Poughkeepsie and the largest city park in Poughkeepsie. And you have to kind of go around the back end to where the golf course is. And right across from the entrance of the golf course is this historic garden called the Lone Memorial Garden. It's a rock garden that was expanded and planted with native pollinator species in this front end. The back end, where really most of the rock garden is we're currently working on rehabilitating that, getting the invasives out and planting it with more rock garden species that are also native. So there'll be some plantings happening this spring that are kind of up in this area of the garden, and it's almost complete. But it's really a beautiful garden and a great place to look at some of our native wildflowers. And then I wanted to just kind of mention a few things that are happening locally that are kind of connected to more regional efforts that everybody can actually get involved in as a resident. Like, you don't have to be part of an organization to get, to use these resources. The first is the Pollinator Pathway Initiative, which, as Jewel mentioned, there's going to be a meeting about on March 23rd to talk more about it. And I put in the chat a link to the flyer that has the Zoom link on it. So feel free to use that link to join in on this meeting. But it's being hosted by the town of Poughkeepsie, and they've Susan Carnes-Hetch, who is the Climate Smart Community Task Force Coordinator, has really put a lot of effort into trying to get this up and running in the town of Poughkeepsie. And she's got a lot of stakeholders involved, a lot of the local schools, a lot of the colleges, including Vassar and the Environmental Cooperative. And I think Jewel is going to put this link in the resources document, but it's just full of different resources. All these links, all these little tabs are fun to explore. And a lot of them are local. So there'll be a lot going on with this soon. We have a Vassar student that's developing a map where you can, and it's an interactive map where you can put in your piece of prop, like a dot where your pollinator garden is, so that we can then look at, like our county and see where everybody has their little pollinator garden. And the idea is to create connections. Oh, there's the flyer. The other thing that Vassar has gotten involved in is this Bee City USA initiative through the Xerces Society. So Xerces is spelled X-E-R-C-E-S. It's up there in the corner. But Bee City USA is a program where communities can basically apply and become a member, and they have to pay like dues every year, but in return you get a lot of good information, opportunities for some funding, and they have an offshoot of this called Bee Campus USA. So Vassar is a bee campus, and we applied for, they're giving out like bunches of plugs of native plants. So we applied to get like 700 native wildflower plugs for this spring. We haven't found out if we got it yet, but there's like opportunities like that. But even besides that, there's again all these great resources, and they send out monthly emails that have a lot of interesting things. You can see what other cities and towns are doing in regard to pollinators. So it's a nice way to connect with some more regional efforts. And then the National Wildlife Federation also has a couple of programs. Hyde Park is involved in this community wildlife habitat program. oh gosh, Kathy, I'm blanking on her name now, and I told, you're muted.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, it's Mary Langenau.
That's right, Mary Langenau. So she is, she's in the Visual Environment Committee as well, I believe.
She does the Hyde Park Garden Habitat.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so Hyde Park is working towards becoming certified through the National Wildlife Federation. But the National Wildlife Federation also has just a program for folks that want to do stuff in their backyard, and you can become part of the program as well. Just by, I'm not exactly sure. I think there's certain things you have to complete, and you get a nice sign that says your property is a certified wildlife habitat. But they have a really large focus on pollinators as well, and birds. And so that's pretty much my presentation. I did just want to put this slide in here. This was from a webinar we did last week about our climate action plan, but I really would love you to focus on these maps, and in preparation of this next webinar where you're talking about invasives. We have a huge problem with invasive species on the Ecological Preserve. And if you look at these maps of forested and unforested areas from 1996 and 2020, you'll notice on the western edge of the preserve, it looks kind of like Swiss cheese, as opposed to 1996, where, I mean, maybe it's a little smaller, the forested area, but it's definitely more solid green. And that Swiss cheese effect is coming from bittersweet vines. So the bittersweet vines get in, they take down, they actually are able to topple down trees because they cause so much weight at the top of the tree with all their vegetative mass. The trees fall over more easily in windstorms and create gaps. And those gaps then support more vines, because the vines love edge habitat. Like that's where their preferred habitat. So they're actually creating it almost sounds like a horror movie, but like these vines are actually like creating their own habitat by killing mature trees. And to me, it's a huge issue. And every time I drive along this, like now when I drive to work, I see the vines on the, you can see them on the telephone poles, you see them on the wires, you see them in the forests. And it's just, it's one of those things that, like when Doug Tallamy talks about, if everyone in their own backyard took care of their situation, all of that, it kind of compounds, and it could actually make a difference. So like we go out every year in the spring, my husband goes out and goes through the brush and cuts as many of the bittersweet vines as he can see. And we've actually seen a few trees in our yard since we moved here 7 years ago that were covered in vines and now are not. And you can keep it back. You can keep the bittersweet back with yearly cutting. Takes some work, but if everybody did it, it might actually make some impact and avoid this kind of Swiss cheese effect into the more larger forested areas that we still have here in Dutchess County. So I'm sure Brent will talk more about that in 2 weeks, but just kind of setting him up. So, okay, with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and I think we can take questions.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you both, Kathy and Jen. This has given us a lot to think about. Kathy, from the chat box, one of the questions is, can you suggest shortish native plantings for a front yard pathway that absolutely needs to be tidy?
Well, yeah, there are asters that are not humongous, so there would be that. Probably Coreopsis is not a tall plant. I'm trying to think. Depending on what kind, if it's sunny or not, in terms of ground cover, the woodland, if you have some shade or like filtered shade, the woodland phlox is just gorgeous, and it blooms in the spring, and that's a short, more ground covered plant, but it doesn't smother other things out. Let me think of what else. The bloodroot is not tall, and it's tidy. Oh, let's see. Just kind of going off the top of my head here. Oh, well, Jen mentioned the Golden Alexander, Zizia. That's a wonderful plant, and that is not a tall plant. And it's an early spring bloomer. It has kind of a flat top head. They're an important both host plant and pollinator plant, and they're very easy to care for. They're pretty carefree. And of course, if you've got some shades, the trilliums, although the deer will munch on those. I do spray with deer repellent my trilliums. They don't bother the bloodroot. So there's actually quite a few. I'm kind of running out of, but there's more. There's more that you can keep pretty, that stays pretty tidy.
Great. There was a second question for you, Kathy, about leaves. You talked about just letting the leaves stay, in that area that you had carved out. The question is, do you ever remove those leaves?
Yes. What I usually do is in the spring, once things get up to like 50 degrees, everything's out and about. But I sometimes too, because as things are emerging, I will thin the leaves out. I don't chop them up or throw them away, but I will pull some leaves out and put them in a little pile in the early spring. And others, I'll just kind of remove them. So yes, I don't let them pile up so that they suffocate things throughout the season. But I don't, I either compost them or put them in with a brush pile later in the spring.
Okay. There were several questions in the chat about links to the meetings and information about the Doug Tallamy thing. I'll send all of that in the email tomorrow so that everybody gets it. So let's see what else. Here's a question. We have sedum plants that I notice are very popular with lots of bugs. From a Google search, I don't think they're invasives. Would they be recommended?
From Cornell's standpoint, non-natives, as long as they're not invasive, are fine. And I know Xerces too. I have oregano growing that they love. So yes, I know he really encourages native across the board, but there are also native sedums, by the way. I got some native sedum at Adams, and I can't think of the, I'd have to Google it, but there are native sedums also, which are quite lovely. The one I have is low, it's more of I have it in a pot. It actually overwinters in a pot and then has self-sown on the ground, and it's little white flowers. So, but yes, I have some from years ago, sedum, and the bees do like it. They do prefer the natives though. If you have a good native next to them, they do. And one of the things I left out is Tradescantia. I wouldn't recommend it for the person who has to be tidy, the spider plant. Bumblebees in particular, Penn State did a research project. Bumblebees really prefer Tradescantia. That's one of their favorites because they can sense the pollen to lipid. They like a high pollen to lipid ratio, and Tradescantia offers that, along with, there were two others. What were they now? Culver's root and American senna, but the Tradescantia, if you want bumblebees, they love it.
All right. We're focusing on invasives next time, but does anybody want to make a comment about Tree of Heaven?
Oh gosh. I don't know. Do you want to, Jen?
It's nasty. What I've heard, I know a lot of people don't like to use herbicides, but cutting and painting the stem with a little herbicide seems to be the most effective way to control it. Just using it very sparingly. But for larger trees, I've also heard girdling the tree is one way to kill it without sending up a lot of root sprouts. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I don't like it. And yeah, and also someone put in the chat too that the preferred host of the spotted lanternfly, which is something that's probably going to move into our area any day now. So yeah,
Yep.
definitely, it's definitely something, if you can get rid of it,
Mhm.
that's for the best. We just cut down a whole bunch on campus at Vassar, some large ones that we just took down.
Right.
So
Are they
Good
now
news.
oh, I'm sorry. Never mind.
No, I was just going to jump in with good news that Adams is supposedly going to have a native plant section outside this spring. So that's nice to hear.
that's great.
Kathy, you were going to say?
I was just going to ask Jen, because I know they say if you just cut it, the suckers come
Yeah.
up all over.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. These trees are in large, like almost like lawns, so they'll probably just get mowed, whatever pops up. Mhm.
So you keep it down.
Yeah.
All right, Eileen?
Is the Virginia creeper the same as bittersweet as far as destroying the trees?
No, it's not. One of the things that bittersweet does is it wraps itself around the tree, and you'll notice Virginia creeper crawls up the tree.
Right.
So that's a big difference, because the bittersweet also girdles and will end up girdling the tree at some point. And Virginia creeper is a wonderful native. Kathy, like that's my understanding. It has,
Yeah, I was going to say that's a native. So
Yeah.
native plants people think are invasive because they can really take off, but they're not. The Virginia creeper is a native.
Okay, thank you.
it doesn't hurt your, it shouldn't be, it doesn't hurt your trees as
No,
far
it's
as I know.
climbing up. It's like
Mhm.
with it attaches differently.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Who else has a question here tonight?
There's a question in the chat about what kind of trees were planted around Vassar and how did we select them? So in regard to the tree plantings we did, those trees were a variety of native riparian, like trees that usually you would find along stream sides. So there was a lot, there's like white oak, sycamore, tulip tree. There's also mixed in with it some shrubs. And the way that we didn't actually select those were selected for us by the DEC's Trees for Tribs program. They come to the site, assess the site, and then pick which trees they think should go there. I did want to mention that the DEC has a program called Buffer in a Bag that I believe is for residents, that if you live near a stream and want to plant your stream side piece of property, you can apply for these. I believe it's all free. You can apply for these Buffer in a Bag, where they give you a bunch of small saplings to plant on your property.
There's an article on your resource sheet about that very project. There's a question in the chat about how far apart to space butterfly bushes, as well as where is the Hyde Park Pollinator Garden?
Oh, I'm just, right before I answer that, I see something from Adrian. Shouldn't we wait until late spring before removing leaves? Yeah, Adrian, I wasn't clear on that. Yeah, I sometimes will uncover little things coming up, kind of relocate the leaf a little, but yes, you should wait till about 50 degrees where things have emerged and flown away before really removing them. Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't clear on that. Hyde Park doesn't have a specific pollinator garden. The Visual Environment Committee has started incorporating some natives into the roadside gardens that we have. And then individual people, like my personal property is a pollinator garden. And then some of the, like Vanderbilt Gardens is a certified wildlife habitat. The SPCA is a certified wildlife habitat. There's an effort to get enough residences and businesses to certify as wildlife habitats so that the whole town can become one. So there's not one specific area, but we're just all trying to incorporate the town where the town hall is. Those grounds are certified wildlife habitat as well. And then of course goes into that, the component to that is not using pesticides, or, you know, it's really, really decreasing. I mean, we don't use pesticides in my yard at all. And I wanted to refer to that with lawns. What lawn you have, keep the mower blade. I think Tallamy talks about this, you know, 3 inches up. And we have violets, and we have our dandelions, but we have violets and clover growing in the lawn, what lawn we have. So, you know, I recommend that personally.
Terrific. In the chat, application process for the buffer in a bag by the DEC is open till March 31st. So you still have a little bit of time if you are interested in applying for that. We have a question here. Can you suggest trees for a development like Fox Hill? We're replacing plum trees that have died over the years, trees that are native but also might be decorative along the roadway.
Well, I guess Jen and I could both, you know, red buds are lovely, dogwoods. Jen, do you have suggestions?
Well, I guess I was gonna maybe encourage thinking about like fall foliage instead of spring flowers. And I think you have more choices there that are native. But I was also gonna mention there's that website in Doug Tallamy's book that showed, if you put in your zip code, it'll give you a list of like the top trees. I love that website.
Yeah, the National Wildlife Federation Native Plant Database. Yeah.
That's a great resource. And it's on that resource sheet that Jewel has.
Yeah, they have the oak, the willows, you know, the berry and plum and crabapple, probably combining. I don't know how many trees you want to put in, but.
All right, very good. Who else has a question? Yes, Eileen?
I have a whole shady area, and in the fall, it is totally covered with leaves. So if I wanted to put, say, ground cover in that area so I don't have to mow, is that possible with all the leaves falling on top of the ground cover?
Yes.
And you just
Is there any specific ground cover?
Well, there's, you know, there is a native Pachysandra that you could put in. There are native heucheras. Tiarella foam flower is, you know, another. It depends on how much, like if you want a broad ground cover of one thing or building a
right.
There's a let's see, Tiarellas, the heucheras, very carefree. I mean, the deer don't bother mine at all. Oh, let me think. I mean, the woodland phlox are gorgeous. It depends on how dense the shade is, though. I find the woodland phlox are more, you know, dappled shade, I would say.
Uh-huh.
Oh, let's see. But those are just a few off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The other question is, like at College Hill or anywhere at Vassar where the pollinator gardens are these, are the plants ever labeled so that when we walk through there, we can get ideas of what we might want to plant at home if we're not that familiar with plants?
That's a great idea. No, they're not. But
excuse me,
especially at College Hill Park, that would be something that that's a good idea. Thank you. Yeah, I'll look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Someone else? Okay, let me just check the chat. Wonderful meeting. Folks have to go somewhere else. What else do we have? Okay. Is there a short plant that can replace some grass? I missed this one earlier, sorry.
Yeah, there's a native strawberry. I don't have personal experience with this, but I've attended a few that talk about a native strawberry being, that could actually stand up to some foot traffic. And I suppose that would be, there's an area in my garden that that I've been putting some broadleaf carex in. That's a little shadier, but it's not really receiving foot traffic. But somebody, I can't vouch for this personally, but I've heard it from two different sources about replacing lawns that said the native strawberry can tolerate foot traffic.
Fascinating.
Yeah, maybe even like clover. I don't know. I mean, I know at Vassar, we have in that courtyard area near the barn, it's almost all clover right now.
That's in our lawn. Our lawn is
Yeah.
mostly clover and violets.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always hesitant to recommend something that I haven't tried myself, but with the strawberry, but I thought it was very interesting. I want to try a little spot of it.
Very good. Let's see. Clarabelle says the interactive pollinator garden map is such a wonderful project. Will there be information available on private local garden qualifications for submission to the map, like number of square feet, number of species, etc.? Should we keep checking the pollinator pathway site?
Yes.
You have more insight on that, Jen?
Yeah, so I know I did a test run of this map, and it's pretty, when I saw it, it was pretty basic. It wasn't even like asking about square footage or number of species. It was more just like, where's your location? But they might have changed it since I've seen it. But the pollinator pathways, I believe it's going to be up on that pollinator pathways site. So if you go to the pollinator pathway sites, there's a tab where you can look for your town, and the town of Poughkeepsie is now on there. And I think eventually Susan is going to have that map somehow attached to that. So yeah, keep an eye out for that.
I will say that Susan has agreed to come and be a guest with us the first meeting that we have in April. So you'll have a chance to talk with her specifically about that project too. We had a question from Kathy, who was looking for plants that would encourage a beginner.
So in other words, very easy to carefree. If you place the plant in the right site, most natives are quite easy, like the tiarellas, and they divide well, and I have them all over the place now. Again, I go back to the bloodroot. That was one of the first natives that I actually put in many years ago, and I just love surprises. So the ants plant them everywhere for me. So I just really love that plant. And it's surprisingly, it thrives in a west-facing sun. It's supposed to be a woodland plant, and they're all over my sunny borders. A lot of them are easy for beginners. The Woodland Phlox, I bought a tiny little Woodland Phlox from a native plant seller, and I put it in, and it's all over. It's everywhere. It's just gradually just spread everywhere. And it's not to the point where it's hard to manage. I do have some natives that kind of start taking over everything, and I have to dig them out to certain places. What else is easy? Coreopsis are easy. the golden Alexander, it's Zizia, very easy plant. And I happen to love it. And these are ones that the deer don't really bother much either. If you put in trilliums, I find you have to spray them, you know, but they're worth it in my opinion.
Yeah, I would also, I just want to chime in, if you have a sunny, like poor soil, the butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, it's a milkweed and it's super easy to grow, and it doesn't really get too much out of it. It has a tap root, so it doesn't really spread underground as much as by seed, and the butterflies love it. And it's orange. I mean, there's not many like bright orange flowers out there, so and then also bee balm or Monarda fistulosa is a really easy, but that's a mint, that's in the mint family, so it will take over.
Yeah.
And it's almost too easy.
Yeah, some of them are, I mean, the goldenrod too, but you need space and it will go. But pycnanthemum, a mountain mint, I had tried to, I have a video, I have a few species of that. The pollinators absolutely adore it, but that's also in the mint family. But I don't find it super aggressive. I mean, it will spread, but I have a video that unfortunately, it wouldn't take with my Mac, wasn't compatible with. You can just see them all moving. The pollinators are all over it, and you just see them. You've got butterflies, bees, flies. It's a wonderful, wonderful plant, and it's totally carefree.
One last question here. Don't the deer like Flocks and Aster? Yes, you did mention that the deer like the aster. They'll eat phlox too, right?
They do. They don't really bother the woodland phlox much. I do bring a little spray as I'm walking by, but they like the, the taller phlox. They don't bother my woodland phlox as much. But the asters, yes, I spray them with repellent.
All right. Well, it's 7 o'clock. We're going to wrap this up. I am so grateful to Kathy and Jen for joining us tonight. And I want to thank all of you for being here, and just keep being inspired by this great weather and all your reading and all these wonderful websites and resources. And just we're gonna build this area into all kinds of wonderful natural habitats and bring in all these great pollinators, and they're just all gonna love the Mid-Hudson Valley, just like we do, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you again in 2 weeks, but look for your email tomorrow. Thank you again. Good night.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everybody.